Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest where they are, open and easy. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold, nothing to figure out. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going somewhere cold and quiet, somewhere deep in the winter countryside of Japan, where the snow falls slowly and the nights are long, and the world outside is muffled and still. There is a small house and a warm fire, and a sound, soft, steady, rhythmic, the sound of a loom weaving something in the back room. Something beautiful. Breathe in slowly and let it out. This is the story of the crane who returned to kindness. Let it carry you gently into rest. There is a village at the edge of a cedar forest, in a part of Japan where the winters are long and the snow falls deep. The village is small, perhaps 20 households, clustered together against the cold, their thatched rooftops buried under white, pressed down by the weight of the snow until the houses look like they are crouching, low and patient, waiting for spring. Smoke rises from every chimney in the mornings, thin gray threads that climb straight up into the still cold air before being pulled apart by the gentlest of breezes. The paths between the houses are narrow and packed with old snow, worn down by footsteps until they are icy and smooth, and everyone walks carefully on them, children, old people, everyone, because the ground is always uncertain and the cold is always close. Around the village, the cedar forest stands dark and dense. In summer, the forest is alive with sound, the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, the wind moving through the layered canopy. But in winter, it is almost completely silent, the snow weighing down the branches until they droop, the trees standing very still. Only the occasional soft sound of a branch releasing its load of snow, a brief cascade of white, breaks the silence of the cold hours. Beyond the forest, to the west, there are open fields that in summer are planted with rice, and in winter are bare and flat and covered with snow, stretching away to the low hills in the distance. On clear days, when the sky is the pale clear blue of deep winter, the hills are visible and very beautiful, white against blue, soft and close. The nights in this village, in winter, are very long. The sun sets early and the darkness comes quickly, and the cold with it, and people come inside before the light is fully gone, closing their doors and tending their fires. The irori, the sunken hearth in the center of the main room, is the heart of the house in winter, burning all through the night, fed with small pieces of wood that glow orange and then gray and then orange again as the night moves on. The warmth from the irori is a serious warmth, not decorative but necessary, keeping the walls from the worst of the cold and keeping the family alive through the long, dark months. People sleep close to the irori in the coldest months, wrapped in thick quilts, their breathing slow and even. The mornings come slowly, the light arriving first as a pale suggestion at the edge of the paper screens, and then growing gradually into something real, and the cold is always worst just before dawn. when the fire has burned low and the room has a deep chill that penetrates the quilts, and the decision to get up and face the day is never easy. But it is made every morning by every household in the village, the water drawn from the well, broken through a skin of ice in the coldest weeks, the rice set to cook, the fire fed, and another winter day begun. This is the world of our story, a world of cold and snow and firelight, where the nights are long and the warmth of a house is something earned and tended and never taken for granted. In this world, there lived a young man named Yohei, perhaps 20 years old, perhaps a little older, who lived alone in a small house at the edge of the village, near the place where the path to the forest began. He was not unhappy, simply alone, his parents having passed some years before, one after the other, in the quiet way that people pass when the body has lived long enough and simply grows tired. He had no brothers or sisters, no relatives nearby, and he lived with the house they had left him, and the few tools they had left him, and the habits of life they had taught him. He was a woodcutter, as his father had been, and each day he walked into the forest with his hatchet and his rope, and came back with what wood he needed for the fire, and sometimes a little extra to sell in the village for rice and salt, and the few other things he could not grow or find himself. He was not prosperous, and he was not poor. He had enough, and he was grateful for enough. He was a quiet young man by nature, comfortable with silence and with his own company, comfortable with the particular quality of a life spent mostly outdoors, moving through the forest and the fields with the attention of someone who has learned to read the world around him. He noticed things, the way the light fell on snow, the tracks of animals in the morning, the way the temperature changed when clouds moved in, the sound the trees made in different winds. These observations were not poetry to him, but practical knowledge, the kind that keeps a person safe and fed and oriented in the world, though they were also a source of quiet pleasure, the pleasure of a mind that pays attention and finds the world endlessly interesting in small ways. He cooked his own meals, simple things, rice and whatever vegetables he had pickled or stored from the autumn, sometimes a fish from the stream that ran along the edge of the forest, and he washed his own clothes and kept his small house reasonably clean and reasonably warm, going to sleep when the darkness came and waking when the light returned. It was a modest life and a solitary one, but it was not empty. There was dignity in it, the dignity of useful work and honest living, of a person who asks little of the world and gives back what he takes. One afternoon in the middle of winter, he was walking home through the fields when he saw something in the snow. He had been to the village that day to trade some firewood for rice, and he was taking the longer way home along the edge of the open fields because the sky was clear and the light was still good and he was in no hurry. The snow in the fields was undisturbed, a flat white surface, stretching away on both sides of the narrow path, unmarked except for the occasional track of a small animal, and the air was cold and very clean, the kind of cold that clears the head and sharpens everything. He was walking with his eyes on the path when something caught his attention in the field to his right, a shape dark against the white, large enough to be noticeable. He stopped and looked, and saw that it was a crane, a beautiful bird, tall and white, with a cap of red at the top of its head and long dark trailing feathers at the tail. Japanese cranes are large birds, larger than most people expect when they see one for the first time, and this one was lying in the snow at the edge of the field, its long neck curved down, its wings folded unevenly, not moving. Yohei stood on the path for a moment, watching, and then stepped carefully off the path and into the snow, walking slowly so as not to startle the bird. As he got closer, he could see that the crane was breathing, the chest rising and falling slowly. It was alive. It had not frozen. But something was wrong, for one of its wings was extended at an odd angle, and as he got closer still, he could see why. A hunter's arrow, lodged in the joint of the wing, had struck the bird and brought it down here in this field, far from wherever it had been going. Yohei knelt in the snow beside the crane, and the bird looked at him with a clear, dark eye, very calm and very alert, and did not try to move away, but simply looked at him and waited. He had some experience with injured animals. Living alone near a forest, he had occasionally come upon creatures that were hurt, and had helped them when he could. A rabbit once, a small hawk once, a deer that had gotten its leg caught, and he was not a person who turned away from things that needed help. He spoke to the crane quietly, the way he had learned to speak to frightened animals, low, steady, continuous, like running water, nothing threatening, just a sound. Then, very carefully, he removed the arrow, holding the wings still with one hand while he worked with the other, and the crane, though large and strong even in its injured state, cooperated, held still as if it understood what was happening, its breathing steady, its eye on him throughout. When the arrow was out, he packed snow carefully against the wound to slow any bleeding, and then sat back on his heels and looked at the bird, and the bird looked at him. He could not carry it home. It was too large and too fragile, and there was nothing more he could do here in the field, so he did what he could. He removed his outer coat and arranged it carefully over the crane's body to keep it warm, then walked back to his house, returned quickly with some cloth and a little millet, and stayed with the crane until the light failed and the cold began in earnest. Then he went home. In the morning, before first light, he went back to the field. The crane was gone, and only the impression of its body in the snow remained, along with his coat, neatly folded and left beside the impression, and the arrow. He stood and looked at the empty snow for a moment, then picked up his coat and the arrow and walked home. That evening, as Yohei was sitting by the orori eating his simple dinner, rice and pickled daikon, nothing elaborate, there was a sound at his door, a knocking, 3 times, light but clear. He was not expecting anyone, and he rarely had visitors. He set down his bowl and went to the door and opened it. There was a young woman standing in the snow, perhaps his age, perhaps a little younger. It was difficult to say. Dressed in traveling clothes, plain and dark, with a cloth bundle on her back. The snow was falling lightly, and her hair had a few flakes caught in it, and she was very still, standing there in the cold, looking at him with clear, calm eyes. She told him that she had been traveling and had lost her way in the snow and was very cold, and asked if she might come in and rest by his fire for a little while. Yohei stood in the doorway for a moment. He was a solitary person and unaccustomed to company, but the night was cold, and the snow was falling, and she was clearly tired and in need of warmth, and so he stepped aside and invited her in. She came into the small house quietly, without making a fuss, and sat by the irori, with her hands extended toward the warmth, looking around the small room with the clear, attentive gaze of someone who is observing everything without commenting on it. From her bundle she drew a small cloth bag of rice, which she said would see them fed, and though it was not a large bag, it never seemed to empty, no matter how many bowls of rice it filled. He stopped questioning it after a while, for some things are better accepted than explained. She accepted the bowl of rice he offered her that first night, and ate it with evident appreciation, but without greed. Yohei sat across from her and they ate in a comfortable silence, and after a while she said her name was Tsuru, a common enough name. It simply meant crane, and he noted it without thinking about it much. She said she had come from the north and was going south and had misjudged the distance between villages, and when he asked if she had family she was going to, she said not exactly, and he did not press her, for it was not his way to press. After dinner she helped him clear the bowls and wash them, moving around the small kitchen with an ease that suggested she was accustomed to such work, her movements quiet and economical, without hurry. When everything was put away, he made up a sleeping place for her near the irori, a futon from the chest in the corner, thick quilts from the cupboard, and she thanked him simply and lay down, and he went to his own side of the room and lay down as well, and the fire burned low and the snow fell outside, muffling everything. He lay and listened to the silence for a while, aware of the unusual presence of another person breathing in the room, and found that it was not uncomfortable. Somehow it felt natural, as if the house had been waiting for this, and he slept. In the morning the snow had stopped, and the world outside was white and very bright, the air carrying the particular sharpness of a clear winter day after fresh snow. Yohei woke before full light, as was his habit, and found that Tsuru was already awake. She had rebuilt the fire and set water to boil, and was sitting quietly by the irori, her hands in her lap, looking at the flames, and she looked up when he got up and gave him a small nod, the kind that contains everything necessary and nothing extra. She helped him with the morning tasks, the water from the well and the rice set to cook, and the small order of the day established, moving through it all in the quiet way of someone who has done such things for a long time and does not need to think about them. After breakfast, he put on his coat and took up his hatchet and rope to go to the forest, and she said she would stay and see to the house, and he nodded and went. In the forest he worked as he always worked, steadily without hurry, paying attention to the trees and the snow and the light and the cold, but some part of his mind was on the house and the young woman in it, and the fact that when he came home there would be someone there, a strange feeling, not unpleasant, just strange. When he came home in the afternoon, the house was warm and clean in a way that it had not been before. She had swept the floor and tidied the kitchen and arranged the things by the irori with a careful attention to order that he had never quite managed himself, and there was soup on the fire, something simple, miso with tofu and the dried mushrooms he had stored from autumn, but it smelled better than anything he had made for himself in a long time. They ate together and talked a little about the forest, about the winter, about small ordinary things, and she was quiet but not silent, asking questions with a real interest in the answers, listening the way some people listen, with their whole attention, without waiting for their turn to speak. The days settled into a rhythm. He went to the forest and she kept the house, and in the evenings they sat by the irori and talked a little and were quiet a lot, and the silence between them was comfortable in the way that silence between two people becomes comfortable when those people have begun, without quite deciding to trust each other. A week passed, then two, then a month, and the question of when she would continue her journey to the south was never raised, seeming to have become, by some unspoken agreement, irrelevant. She was here. He was here. The winter continued. The house was warm. The food was simple but good, and that was enough. One evening, near the end of that first month, she told him she wanted to weave, having noticed the old loom in the back room, his mother's loom, unused for years, dusty and still, and she asked if she might use it. He said of course, for he had not looked at the loom in years, and it was doing no good sitting there. She thanked him and spent an afternoon cleaning and adjusting the loom, her hands moving over it with a confident precision that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, and she strung it with fine white thread she had brought in her bundle. He did not ask where it had come from, and then went into the back room and closed the door, and the sound began. The sound of a loom is one of the most particular sounds there is. The shuttle moving back and forth, the beater pressing the threads together, the treadles moving up and down in steady sequence, a mechanical sound in a way, but also an organic one, the sound of patience, of repetition, of something being made one thread at a time. In this small house, in the quiet of winter, the sound of Tsuru's loom filled the rooms gently, not loud, but simply present. A steady rhythmic sound that moved through the walls of the back room and spread through the house like warmth from a fire, and Yohei found that he liked it. He had grown accustomed to silence in his solitary life, and silence was comfortable to him, but there was something about this particular sound that was even more comfortable than silence. It was company without conversation, presence without demand, and he could sit by the irori and listen to the shuttle moving back and forth, and feel, in some way he could not quite explain, that everything was as it should be. She wove for 3 days, and he did not look into the back room, for on the first day she had asked him simply and gently, without urgency, please not to look at her while she worked, and he had accepted that as a simple request, and did not go to the back room, did not try to see. He went to the forest in the mornings and sat by the irori in the evenings and listened to the shuttle, and on the third day the weaving stopped, and after a long silence she came out of the back room, very pale, paler than he had seen her, with shadows under her eyes, moving slowly as if tired in a deep way that sleep might not entirely fix. But she was smiling. She brought out what she had made and laid it on the floor between them, and he saw that it was cloth, but not ordinary cloth. He had seen cloth all his life, the plain cotton and hemp of everyday life, and the occasional silk of something expensive and formal. But this was neither of those things. It was white, and it had a quality to it that he could not quite name, a luminousness, as if light were somehow present in the threads themselves, coming from inside the weave rather than being reflected from the surface, and it was the most beautiful thing he had seen. He said so, and she smiled and told him he could take it to the village and sell it, that it would bring a good price, and he did, and the cloth brought more money than he had ever had at once, enough for rice and miso for many months, and good firewood and the small things that make a life easier, and the merchant who bought it held it up to the light, and turned it over and back again, with wide eyes, saying he had never seen anything like it. Yohei came home, and gave Tsuru the money, and she put it away, and said nothing more about it, but she rested for a long time, before she was herself again. He noticed the fatigue, noticed that the weaving took something from her, though he could not say what, and he thought about it during his days in the forest, turning it over in his mind the way he turned over a problem with a tree, carefully, from different angles. And he thought that she had given him something, and that he should not ask for more than she offered. And so when, after another month had passed and she was fully rested, she said she wanted to weave again, he said yes, and he did not ask questions, and he did not go to the back room, and again the shuttle moved and the cloth grew, and 3 days later she emerged, pale and tired and smiling, with something more beautiful than the first time. Winter deepened and then, slowly, began to ease. The days grew imperceptibly longer, the light changing by small degrees, a little more gold in the morning, a little less dark in the late afternoon, and the snow on the roof began to drip on warm afternoons, and the cedar trees shed some of their snow and stood straighter. In the house, life had taken on a shape that felt permanent, though neither of them had said so. Yohei had stopped thinking of Tsuru as a visitor, and had stopped thinking of the house as his, and started thinking of it as theirs, without any conversation about this having taken place, for she was simply here, and the house was different because she was here, warmer and cleaner and more alive, and he could not imagine it going back to what it had been. He thought about this one morning in the forest, his hatchet at his side, the snow around him beginning to show the first signs of the season turning. He thought about the cloth she made and the fatigue afterward, and the way she never spoke about either, and he thought about the quiet of her presence, the way she looked at the world with a steadiness that reminded him sometimes of something he could not quite name. He thought about the crane. He had thought about it before, occasionally, in the way that small events sometimes stay in the mind longer than their apparent significance warrants. The crane in the snow, the arrow, the careful removal of it, the night he had stayed and the morning he had returned to find it gone, and his coat folded neatly in the snow. He did not connect these things directly. He was not the kind of person who rushed to conclusions. He held the thoughts separately and let them be. But the thought was there. He came home that afternoon to find Tsuru sitting by the irori, with her hands in her lap, looking at the fire. She looked up when he came in and smiled, and he sat across from her, and they were quiet together for a while in the way they had become accustomed to. After a time he spoke, telling her that she had given them so much. The cloth, the work of it, the price it brought. She said it was nothing. He told her gently that it was not nothing, that it cost her something, and he could see that it did. She was quiet for a moment before saying that all giving costs something. He told her then that he wanted to know where the cloth came from and how she made it. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes clear and very still, and said that he had always been patient with her, that he had never pressed her, and that she was grateful for that. He said that he was pressing her now, and that he was sorry, and that she did not have to answer. She told him that she knew, but that she would answer anyway. She paused for a moment before saying that the cloth came from her, that it was made of her, and that she could not explain it more than that. He thought about this for a long time before saying that he did not want any more cloth. She looked at him with an expression he could not read. He told her that he would rather have her rested and whole than have the finest cloth in Japan. She looked at him for a long time, and then said quietly that he was a good man. And they sat by the fire as the night came down, and the last of the winter snow fell softly outside, and they did not talk about the cloth again. Spring came, as it always does, slowly and then all at once. The snow left the fields first, then the paths, then gradually the roof. The cedar forest grew lighter as the light changed and the snow on the branches finally fell. The stream that ran along the edge of the forest, which had been locked under ice since November, broke free one morning with a sound like something waking up, a deep liquid sound full of movement. Birds came back. Not all at once, but one by one, over the weeks of early spring. The bush warbler came first, its clear voice calling from somewhere in the forest, the signal, in Japan, that winter was truly ending. Then the swallows, arriving like a small miracle on a warm afternoon, and then the other birds, each in their season, filling the air with a sound that had been absent for months. Yohei noticed the birds more than he usually did that spring, though he was not sure why. Tsuru was quiet during those weeks, not unhappy. She did not seem unhappy, but thoughtful, the way people are thoughtful when they are turning something over inside themselves, working through something that has not yet found a shape. She helped with the spring tasks, the cleaning of the house that always came when the warmth returned, and the turning of the soil in the small garden. She planted seeds with care, pressing each one into the dark soil with a practiced touch and patting the earth over it gently. She watched the sky a great deal. He noticed this, the way she tilted her face upward when a bird called from somewhere above, the way she tracked movement at the edge of her vision, the particular quality of her stillness when she was watching something in the air. He thought about the crane again. One evening in late spring, when the last of the cold had finally gone, and the house could be left with the door open to the warm evening air, she sat beside him on the engawa, the narrow wooden porch, and they watched the light leave the sky together. After a long time, she told him that she had something to say. He waited. She said that she was not what she appeared to be. He told her quietly that he knew. She looked at him with some surprise and asked if he was certain, and he said that he thought so, that he had thought about it for a long time. She was quiet for a while before telling him that she had come to him because he had been kind to her when she needed kindness, that she had wanted to repay that, to stay and be useful to him and give what she could, and that she had been genuinely happy here. He told her that he knew that too. She told him that there were things that cannot stay, things that belong to other places, other seasons, and that she had stayed through the winter and through the spring and was grateful for every day, but that the time was coming when she must go. He was quiet. She said she was sorry, and he told her not to be, that she had given him more than he had any right to expect. She asked if he would be all right, and he said that he had been all right before and would be all right again. He paused before asking the same of her, and she smiled and told him that she would be more than all right. They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, above the cedar forest. She left on a morning in early summer, when the air was warm already by mid-morning, carrying the smell of growing things, the rice just beginning to show above the water in the paddies, the blossoms on the trees at the edge of the forest, the particular green smell of a world in full growth. She had very little to take, only the bundle she had arrived with, which was somehow still the same size. She put on her plain dark traveling coat, picked up the bundle, and stood in the center of the small room for a moment, looking at it, at the aurori, cold now in the warm season, at the clean walls, at the loom in the back room visible through the open door. Then she looked at Yohei, who was standing by the door, composed in the way of someone who has made peace with something difficult, and is determined to hold that peace, though he had not slept well the night before. She came and took his hands and told him to remember that kindness returns to the kind, that everything he had given her, his coat, his fire, his patience, his care, does not disappear but becomes part of what the world is. He held her hands for a moment and then let them go. She went out the door, and he followed her to the edge of the path and stopped there. She walked a few steps, then paused and turned to look at him one more time, a long, clear look. Then something changed. He would not be able to describe it clearly afterward, no matter how many times he tried. It was not like anything he had seen before. There was a quality of light, and then something white and very large, and then the sound of great wings, a sound he felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears, and then she was gone. A crane, rising from the path where she had stood, white and perfect against the blue summer sky. It circled once above the house, and then again, and then a third time. 3 slow circles, high above the village and the cedar forest, the way that cranes in Japan have always circled when they mean to say thank you, and then it turned and flew north, growing smaller and smaller, until it was a white point against the blue and then gone. Yohei stood in the path for a long time as the morning went on around him. Birds calling from the forest, the rice paddy nearby catching the light and reflecting it, a neighbor's child running along the path in the distance, laughing at something. Life continued, as it always does, without waiting for anyone. He turned and went back inside, and the house was different without her. Not in the way he had expected it to be different, and not empty exactly. She had been there for the better part of a year, and the house had taken on the shape of her presence in ways that did not immediately disappear when she left. The arrangement of things in the kitchen, the particular order of the tools by the hearth, the garden she had planted, which was growing beautifully, the seeds she had pressed into the earth with such care coming up in neat, healthy rows. The loom was still in the back room, and he did not move it or use it, but simply left it there, clean and still, the way she had left it. He went back to his work in the forest, back to his simple meals and his solitary evenings, and the routines of his life resumed around him, familiar and reliable. But things were different now, in ways that were hard to name. He was more attentive to the cranes that passed over the village in their seasonal migrations, the great V formations, moving north in spring and south in autumn, their calls carrying down to the earth in a sound that was half music and half cry. He watched them whenever he could, standing still in the forest or the field, his face turned upward. He did not know which one she was among those hundreds, and he thought perhaps it did not matter. She was in the flock, part of that movement, that seasonal rhythm that was older than the village, and older than the forest, and older than any of the lives lived beneath the bird's passage. He had been part of her story for a while, and she had been part of his. The cloth she had made was gone, sold, spent wisely on things that had made the winter easier, but the memory of it remained, the way certain experiences remain not as images, but as feelings, the quality of that luminous white fabric, the sense of something that had cost more than its visible price. He thought about what she had told him, that kindness returns to the kind, that what you give does not disappear, but becomes part of what the world is. He thought about the crane in the snow, and the arrow, and the decision to stop and help. He thought about the warmth of the house through that winter, the sound of the loom, the evenings by the fire, and the fact that he had never gone to the back room even when he was curious, had never pressed her to explain herself, had accepted what she offered and asked for no more. He was not sure these things counted as virtues. They were simply how he was, how he had always been, though perhaps that was the same thing. The summer passed, and autumn came with its harvest and its particular quality of light. The rice was cut and bundled and dried, as it was every year. The persimmon tree at the corner of the garden, which had been small and struggling when Tsuru had arrived, and which she had tended with quiet care through the spring, bore fruit now, round and orange, glowing against the autumn sky. He looked at it for a long time one morning, and then went inside and made his breakfast and started another ordinary day. The world continued as it always does, steady and unhurried, carrying everything in it forward through the seasons. And so the story of the crane settles into stillness, like snow settling on a quiet field, like the last note of a loom fading into silence. She was real, and he was real, and the cloth was real, and the crane circling 3 times above the house, 3 slow circles, the old gesture of gratitude, and flying north, that was real too. Stories like this one carry something true in them, even when they are not literally true. They carry the truth of kindness, that it is worth giving, that it comes back, that it makes the world different in ways you cannot always see or measure. They carry the truth of things that cannot stay, and of the beauty in temporary things, and of what it means to receive a gift graciously without grasping. They carry the truth of winter warmth, of a fire that burns through the night, of the sound of a loom in a quiet house, steady and soft, making something beautiful from what is given. Let these things rest in you now. You have traveled tonight through snow and firelight, through kindness given and kindness returned, through one winter and one spring in a small house at the edge of a cedar forest in old Japan. Let it all soften now. The snow-covered rooftops, the sound of the loom, the warmth of the irori, the crane rising into the blue summer sky. Let it dissolve gently, like morning mist over the fields when the sun comes over the mountains. There is nothing left to hold tonight, nothing to figure out, nothing to carry. You are warm, and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night. Momotaro, the Peach Boy, a Japanese folktale for sleep, a 90-minute calm storytelling script for YouTube, Quiet Tales of Japan. Close your eyes, if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going to a village in Japan, a small one, the kind that has existed in the valleys and the foothills of the Japanese countryside for hundreds of years, where the houses are close together and the mountains are visible from every doorway, and the river runs along the edge of the fields with the particular sound of a river that has been running through the same valley for longer than anyone can remember. This is one of the oldest stories in Japan, a story that every Japanese child has grown up knowing, that has been told by grandmothers to grandchildren, by parents to children, by teachers to students, for so many generations that the telling itself has become part of the fabric of the culture, part of what it means to have grown up in Japan and been given, early, the stories that shape how you understand the world. It begins, as so many of the old stories begin, with an old man and an old woman living quietly together at the edge of a village, not unhappily, not in the way of people who have been defeated by their lives, but quietly, with the particular quality of quiet that belongs to people who have accepted what their life is and have found in that acceptance a kind of peace. They had no children. This was the one thing that was missing, the one shape of the life they had hoped for that had not arrived, and they had lived with its absence for long enough that it had become simply part of what their life was, present in the way of all absences, which is to say, always there. The old man went to the mountain. In Japan, the relationship between the village and the mountain has always been a fundamental one, more fundamental, perhaps, than in most other places, because Japan is a country that is mostly mountain. More than 2/3 of the land surface of Japan is mountainous. The flat agricultural land, the cities, the rice fields, and the coastal settlements occupy a narrow belt between the sea and the slopes, and the mountains are always present, always visible, always the background against which the human life of the country is lived. They are not distant mountains, not the mountains of postcards and tourism, not the mountains you look at from far away. They are the mountains you live against, whose weather becomes your weather, whose streams become your water, whose forests provide the wood that your house is made of, and the fuel that warms it. The old man went to the mountain for wood. Gathering wood from the mountain forest was one of the fundamental tasks of village life in pre-modern Japan, a task that required specific knowledge of the forest, which trees were mature enough to cut, which could be taken without damaging the forest's ability to recover, where the best wood grew and how to get to it and how to bring it back. This knowledge was accumulated over a lifetime and passed down through generations. The practical wisdom of people who depended on a specific piece of land and had learned over time everything that piece of land could teach. The old man climbing the mountain path in the early morning, the mist still on the lower slopes, the trees darkening as the path goes higher, the sound of the village fading behind him, was doing what he had done hundreds of times before. He was not expecting anything unusual. He was simply going to the mountain as he always went to the mountain, in the way that all the important things happen against the backdrop of the ordinary, quietly, while someone is doing what they have always done. One morning the old woman went to the river to wash clothes. This was ordinary. She had done it many times. The walk from the house to the river, the same walk she had always taken. The stones of the path familiar under her feet. The sound of the water arriving before she arrived, announcing itself in the way the river always announced itself. She knelt at the riverbank and began her work. The water was cold, cold in the particular way of mountain rivers that carry in them the memory of the snowmelt and the shade of the forests through which they pass. and the work was the ordinary work of hands in cold water with cloth, the repeated motion of washing and wringing that leaves the mind free to be elsewhere, while the hands do what they know. Then she saw it, coming around the bend in the river, moving with the current, turning slowly in the water, a peach, not a small one, a large one, larger than any peach she had seen, enormous, the kind of size that does not belong to the ordinary category of fruit, but to something else, something that has been given more of whatever it is that makes things grow than the usual amount. It was the color of peaches, the particular warm pink red of a peach at its fullest ripeness, and it moved down the river toward her with the unhurried quality of something that knows exactly where it is going. She reached out and took it from the water. It was heavy, heavier than a peach should be, heavier than its size alone could account for, with the weight of something that contains more than it appears to. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, feeling the smooth skin warm in her hands despite the cold of the river. Then she carried it home. The river. In the old stories of Japan, rivers are not simply water moving through a landscape. They are boundaries between the settled world and the wild one, between the village and whatever lies beyond it, between the known and the unknown. And they are sources, places where things arrive from upstream that have not been seen before, and carry in them something of where they came from. The old woman went to the river every morning, not for the drama of it, not an expectation of anything extraordinary, but for the work, the ordinary work of washing that requires running water and patience, and the physical engagement of hands and arms in the cold. This is important. The peach did not arrive when she was waiting for it, did not come because she had prayed or hoped or performed any particular action designed to bring it. It came because she was at the river doing what she always did, in the way that unexpected things arrive, not in the moments of special attention, but in the ordinary moments, when you are doing the work and not watching for anything in particular. The river in the Momotaro story is the Asahi River, which runs through what is now Okayama City, the city and prefecture most closely associated with the legend, the place that claims Momotaro as its own hero, where his image appears on manhole covers and confectionery and signs, and the general fabric of the city in the way that beloved figures become part of the visual language of the places they belong to. But the river in the story is also every river, every place where the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary becomes thin enough for something to pass through. The old woman at the water, her hands in the cold, the sound of the current, and then the peach coming around the bend. The old man came home from the mountain in the late afternoon with the wood he had cut. His wife showed him the peach. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a person who is trying to decide what category to place something in, whether it is simply an unusually large fruit or something that belongs to a different category altogether. He did not decide. He simply said, "It is a good peach. Let us eat it this evening." The old woman brought the peach to the table. She raised the knife, and the peach opened, not cut open, not divided by the blade, but opened from within, the two halves parting along a line that had always been there, the skin separating cleanly to reveal what was inside, not the flesh of a peach, a child, a boy, small and perfectly formed, curled in the way of something that has been enclosed, and is now, for the first time, in open space, blinking, looking up at the two faces looking down at him with expressions that contained everything they had hoped for, and had stopped hoping for, and were now receiving in a form they had not anticipated. They named him Momotaro, Momo, peach, taro, the common name suffix that means simply the first son, the eldest, the one who came first, the peach boy. He grew. Children in the old stories always grow faster than ordinary children. They grow at the speed that the story requires. And Momotaro grew quickly, becoming strong and capable at a pace that surprised even the two people who watched him every day. He ate well and slept well, and helped with the work of the house, with the particular quality of helpfulness that comes from a child who has been loved completely and has developed, in response to that love, a genuine desire to give back what has been given. The old man went to the mountain. The old woman went to the river. These two facts, stated at the beginning of almost every version of the Momotaro story, are worth staying with for a moment, because they say something about the world the story is set in and the people at its center. In the Japan of the old stories, the Japan of the villages and the rice fields, and the mountains covered in cedars, and the rivers running down through the valleys, the work of a household was divided between these two movements: outward to the forest for wood, outward to the water for washing, the man to the mountain, the woman to the river. Not because this was the only way it could be, not because these roles were fixed by nature rather than by custom, but because this was the pattern that the particular life of this particular time had produced, the pattern that two people doing the work their life required had settled into over the years. They were old. The old stories do not give them names. They're simply Oji-san and Oba-san, old man and old woman, the universal form of the elderly couple that appears in story after story in the Japanese tradition. Kind, hardworking, patient, living with what they have without complaint, doing what needs to be done with the unhurried quality of people who have done it long enough to know how it is done. There is a quality in these two figures that the Japanese tradition values deeply, the quality of living without excess, of being content with what is, of not reaching past what is given, but receiving what comes with gratitude and care. They could not have children. This was the one gap, the one thing that was not given, and they had lived with it with the same quality with which they lived with everything else, without bitterness, without the consuming resentment of people who cannot accept what they have not been given, but simply continuing, day by day, in the particular grace of people who have made their peace with their lives. And into this peace, into the particular quiet of a life fully accepted, the peach came. There is a version of this story that every Japanese person carries from their earliest years, a version that arrives before reading, before the ability to analyze or critique, before the layers of adult knowledge that make simple things complicated. It arrives in the form of sound, the grandmother's voice, or the mother's, or the teacher's. Reading the words that every version of this story begins with, mukashi mukashi, long, long ago, a phrase that in Japanese is not simply a temporal marker, not simply a way of saying this happened in the past, but a kind of opening, a way of saying we are entering a different kind of time now, the time of the story, the time where the rules of ordinary life are slightly different and things are possible that are not possible elsewhere. Children understand this immediately. They understand it before they can explain it, understand the quality of mukashi mukashi, the way they understand the quality of a lullaby, by the effect it has on them rather than by any analysis of how it works. Something settles when the story begins. The ordinary world steps back. The space opens that the story will fill. And into that space comes the peach. Not a picture of a peach, though the pictures are there in the illustrated books that accompany the reading, but the felt sense of a peach. Large, impossibly large, coming around the bend in the river with a kind of inevitability that only things in stories have, the inevitability of something that was always going to happen and is now happening exactly as it was always going to. The child listening does not know about the Kibi Plain or the historical Kibitsuhiko or the zodiac symbolism of the monkey and the dog and the pheasant. The child knows a peach came, a boy was born, he was brave and kind, he went away and came back, and that is enough, more than enough, to carry through a lifetime, available for the adult to pick up again later and find, to their surprise, that all the layers were already there, waiting for the right moment to be seen. One day, Momotaro came to his parents and said, "I am going to Onigashima." Onigashima, the island of demons, a place that existed in the old geography of the Japanese imagination, somewhere out in the sea, far enough from the shore that it could not be seen from the mainland, close enough that what happened there was felt in the villages along the coast. The oni who lived there, the demons, the creatures that the stories describe with horns and clubs, and the particular ferocity of beings that exist outside the rules that govern ordinary life, had been taking things from the villages, crops, treasures, peace. Momotaro said, "I am going to put a stop to this." The old woman did not argue. She did what the mothers in the old stories do. She accepted what her child had decided, and she prepared what she could to help him on the journey. She made kibidango, millet dumplings, small, round, firm, the food of travelers and workers, the food that keeps well and provides what the body needs for effort. She made them carefully, with the particular care of a person making something for someone they love who is about to go somewhere dangerous. Pressed and shaped with hands that knew this was the last thing they could do for him before the road began. Momotaro tied them at his waist. He bowed to his parents. He thanked them for everything, for the years of care, for the house and the food and the warmth, for the particular quality of the life they had made together in the small house at the edge of the village. Then he turned toward the road and began to walk. The old man and the old woman watched him until he was out of sight. Then they went back inside and continued the day in the particular way of people who are waiting, doing what needs to be done and not thinking too far ahead, and trusting that what has been sent out will, in time, come back. Kibidango, the millet dumplings that Momotaro carries on his journey to Onigashima, are not simply food. They are the currency of the story, the thing that is exchanged for loyalty, the physical form of the agreement between Momotaro and his companions. and they are also a specific reference to a specific place. Kibi is the old name for the region that is now Okayama Prefecture, in western Honshu, on the coast of the Seto Inland Sea. It is one of the oldest agricultural regions in Japan. Rice cultivation was practiced here very early in the Yayoi period, more than 2,000 years ago, and it has long been associated with the particular fertility of the alluvial plains, where the rivers come down from the mountains of the interior and deposit the rich soil that makes the delta farmland of Japan among the most productive in the world. Millet was cultivated here alongside rice, kibi, the grain that gives the region its name. And the dumplings made from kibi were part of the food of the region, in the practical sense of food that people actually ate, food that sustained the bodies of people doing the work that the land required. The grandmother who makes the kibidango for Momotaro's journey is doing the most practical possible thing, giving him the food that will sustain him when there is nothing else, and yet the dumplings do more than sustain. Each one shared with a new companion is a kind of treaty, an agreement between two parties that something will be done together that neither could do alone. The dog receives a dumpling and becomes a companion. The monkey receives a dumpling and becomes a companion. The pheasant receives a dumpling and becomes a companion. The dumplings create the team, and the grandmother's hands, working at the stove in the early morning, shaping the soft dough into the rounds that will hold together through a long journey, are part of the victory that happens later on the island, even though she never sees it. On the road, he met a dog. The dog appeared at the side of the path, a large dog, well-made, with the quality of bearing that belongs to animals that have been doing something purposeful for a long time, and have developed, in the doing of it, a particular kind of presence. The dog asked, "Where are you going?" Momotaro told him. The dog said, "Give me one of your kibidango, and I will come with you." Momotaro gave him a dumpling. The dog fell into step beside him. Further along the road, a monkey appeared, from the trees at the side of the path, dropping down with the ease of a creature entirely at home in the dimension between branches and ground, looking at Momotaro with the alert, curious expression that monkeys have, the expression of something that is always assessing, always calculating, always a few thoughts ahead of the current moment. The monkey asked, "Where are you going?" Momotaro told him. The monkey said, "Give me one of your kibidango, and I will come with you." Momotaro gave him a dumpling. The monkey fell into step beside them. And then a pheasant. The bird descended from the sky with the particular grace of pheasants in flight, the long tail streaming behind, the colors of the feathers catching the light, and landed on the path ahead of them and turned to look at Momotaro with the steady, unblinking look of a bird that has decided something is worth its attention. The pheasant asked, "Where are you going?" Momotaro told him. The pheasant said, "Give me one of your kibidango, and I will come with you." Momotaro gave him a dumpling, and they were four, the boy from the peach, and the dog, and the monkey, and the pheasant, moving together down the road toward the coast, and the sea, and the island that waited. Why a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant? This question has been asked by scholars and by children for a very long time, and the most interesting answer comes not from the folk tradition, but from the old Chinese-influenced system of astrology and cosmology that was a fundamental part of how educated Japanese people, in the medieval period, understood the structure of the world. The 12 signs of the Chinese zodiac correspond to directions as well as to years. The northeast direction, the direction that in Japanese cosmology is associated with evil and misfortune, the direction from which bad things come, is called the Kimon, the demon gate, and it corresponds to the space between the ox, Ushi, and the tiger, Tora. This is also, in the old stories, the direction of Onagashima. The Oni come from the northeast. The Kimon is their door. The southwest, the direction directly opposite the demon gate, is the Urakimon, the back demon gate, and the animals associated with this direction are the monkey, Tsuru, the rooster or bird, Tori, and the dog, Inu, 3 of Momotaro's companions. The pheasant stands in for the rooster. Both are birds. Both represent the same direction. And so the team that accompanies Momotaro is not random, but is the cosmological answer to the problem of the demon gate. The animals of the southwest, the direction of resolution, moving against the northeast, the direction of the problem. This is the kind of layer that the old stories often have. The surface story for children, clear and satisfying, and beneath it the deeper structure for those who look, the connections to the older systems of meaning that organized how the world was understood, the grandmother making dumplings, the boy setting out, the 3 animals joining him one by one, and behind all of this, the particular logic of the cosmos, the southwest, going to meet the northeast, the answer moving toward the question, working itself out in the form of a story that has been told to children for hundreds of years. The road to the coast was long, not as long as roads in other parts of the world. Japan is not a vast country, and the distances between the mountain villages and the sea are not enormous, but long enough that the walking takes days, long enough that the companionship matters, long enough that the person you set out with is no longer a stranger by the time you arrive. Momotaro and his 3 companions walked through the days and rested through the nights. They ate what they had, the kibidango growing fewer, the provisions carefully rationed, and they drank from the streams that ran beside the road, cold mountain water in the cupped hands or from the surface directly, the way that travelers drink when they have been walking and are thirsty and the water is right there. They talked, perhaps. The old stories do not record the conversation. They move from landmark to landmark, from the meeting with the dog to the meeting with the monkey, to the meeting with the pheasant, to the arrival at the coast, without lingering in the ordinary time between. But the ordinary time was there, the walking, the resting, the gradual accumulation of shared miles that produces, between people who are doing something together, the particular quality of trust that cannot be produced in any other way, that requires exactly this: the shared effort, the shared discomfort, the shared arrival at each evening's campfire, with the knowledge that tomorrow will require the same thing again. By the time they reached the coast, they were not 4 separate beings who had made the same journey. They were a group. The particular kind of group that forms when different kinds of creatures have decided, for reasons of their own, that the same thing matters enough to be worth the effort. The dog's loyalty, the monkey's intelligence, the pheasant's perspective. Momotaro's purpose. Separate, each is incomplete. Together, they cover the ground. The Oni. In Japanese folk belief, the Oni are not simply monsters, not simply the generic villains of a story that requires something to defeat. They are something older and stranger than that, figures that appear in the oldest Japanese texts, in the Buddhist literature and the native folk traditions, in the paintings and the sculptures and the stories of 1,000 years, always recognizable, always themselves. They are large. This is the first thing, the scale of them, the way they exist at a size that is outside the human range, that makes the human feel small in a way that changes the quality of the encounter. They have horns, usually 1 or 2, growing from the forehead, the horns of cattle or deer translated into the human form, the particular strangeness of an animal attribute on a human body. That is one of the ways the old stories say, this thing is both like you and not like you. They carry iron clubs, kanabu, weapons that are not the weapons of finesse, not the sword or the bow, but the weapon of pure force, the club that says, I am stronger than you, and this is how I intend to demonstrate it. Onegashima, the island sits out in the sea, beyond the sight of the coast, in the imagination, at least, though the stories that try to locate it in actual geography have placed it at various points along the Seto Inland Sea, and the coasts of Okayama, and the waters off Shikoku. It is a place of abundance. The Oni have taken from the villages what the villages produced, and accumulated it on the island, and a place of noise and energy, and the particular disorder of beings who have power, and have not yet learned that power without restraint produces suffering. Momotaro and his companions reached the coast. They found a boat. The sea spread before them, the particular gray-blue of the inland sea, moving with the long swells that come in from the Pacific and break against the islands and the headlands with the patience that is geological, the patience of water that has been doing this since before memory. Momotaro stood at the prow of the boat and looked toward the horizon where the island waited. The dog sat behind him. The monkey sat behind the dog. The pheasant perched on the prow and looked where Momotaro looked. The boat moved out onto the water. The Seto Inland Sea. Between the main island of Honshu and the islands of Shikoku and Kyushu, the particular body of water that the Japanese call the Seto Naikai, the inner sea, is one of the most beautiful and historically significant stretches of water in Japan. It is not an ocean. It has the quality of an enclosed space, the islands that dot its surface breaking the view into sections, the distant shorelines always visible, the water between them never as open or as intimidating as the open Pacific that crashes against the eastern coast of Japan. It is a sea you can see across, a sea with edges, and in the old stories, in the period when the stories that became Momotaro were first being told, it was the route by which things moved between the different parts of Japan, goods and people, and sometimes armies and sometimes raiders, who came from islands that lay beyond the ordinary sight of the coast. The Oni of Onegashima in the Momotaro story may well be, scholars have suggested, echoes of these actual raiders, the people who came from the sea and took what was not theirs, and returned to their islands beyond the reach of ordinary response. In the old stories, What cannot be addressed through ordinary means is addressed through extraordinary ones. A boy born from a peach, 3 animals who speak, a boat crossing the inland sea toward an island that should not be approachable but is. The water of the Seto Inland Sea has a particular quality of light. The islands create sheltered areas where the surface is calmer than the open water, where the reflection of the sky sits more steadily on the water, where the mountains of the islands are visible in the surface alongside the actual mountains, and where, in the late afternoon, the light takes on the gold and amber of the setting sun in a way that makes the whole scene appear to be lit from within. Momotaro and his companions crossed this water. The pheasant flew above, and its reflection flew below, and the boat moved between them toward the island that needed to be reached. Three animals: the dog who walks beside you, the monkey who is always a few steps ahead, the pheasant who sees from above what those on the ground cannot see. These are not arbitrary choices, not simply the animals that happened to be nearby on the day the story was first told. They are the companions that the particular task requires. The dog brings loyalty, the specific quality of a creature that has made its choice and does not revisit it, that does not calculate its continued participation against the difficulty of the task or the probability of success, but simply continues, because continuing is what loyalty means. The monkey brings intelligence, the ability to see the problem from multiple angles, to find the path through that is not immediately obvious, to use the resources at hand in ways that the problem did not anticipate. The monkey sees the wall and does not see a barrier, sees instead the series of handholds that are already there, already available for anyone who knows how to look. The pheasant brings perspective. From above, from the altitude that flight provides, the situation looks different. The walls are shorter. The gaps between the defenders are visible. The approach that looks impossible from the ground looks entirely possible from the air. The pheasant can go where the others cannot, and come back with the knowledge of what it saw. Together, they cover what none of them could cover alone. This is the quiet teaching beneath the surface of the story. The thing it says not about heroes and demons, but about the nature of a team. That what matters is not whether each person is strong enough or smart enough or fast enough on their own, but whether together they cover the ground that the task requires. The kibidango bind them. The journey makes them more than they were, and what they bring back belongs to all of them. To the boy and the dog and the monkey and the pheasant, as much as it belongs to the village that is waiting. The island appeared out of the sea, dark cliffs, thick trees, the sound of the oni, their voices carrying across the water with the particular carrying quality of sounds that are not trying to be quiet, that exist in a world where there is no need to be quiet, because nothing has yet arrived to require it. The pheasant flew ahead, into the fortress, over the walls, finding the way in with the particular freedom of a creature that moves in 3 dimensions, when the defenders of the walls can only move in 2. The monkey followed, up the gates and over them, finding the handholds that exist in every structure for those who know how to look. The dog at the gate, and Momotaro, at the gate, in the gate, through the gate, with the particular quality of movement of someone who has decided and is now simply executing the decision, without the hesitation that precedes decisions, or the doubt that follows them. The battle does not need to be described at length. What the story requires is that it happened, that Momotaro and his companions met the Oni on their own island and prevailed, and that in prevailing, they recovered what had been taken from the villages along the coast. The treasure, the things accumulated over years of raiding. The great Oni knelt. He said, "We surrender. We will trouble the villages no more. Please spare us." Momotaro looked at him. Then he said, "Go, return what you have taken, and do not come back." The Oni bowed, low, with the particular depth of a bow that acknowledges not just defeat, but the terms of what comes after. The boat went back across the sea, loaded now, with the things recovered, the gold and the cloth, and the various goods that had been carried off from the villages over the years, lower in the water, moving more slowly, but moving. The dog lay in the stern with his head on his paws. The monkey sat amidships and watched the coast appear. The pheasant flew alongside and occasionally above. Momotaro sat at the prow and watched the mountains of the mainland rise out of the sea. The Momotaro story has been read in many ways. In the Meiji period, when Japan was rapidly modernizing and looking for stories that could help define what it meant to be Japanese in a world that was asking Japan to be something new, Momotaro became a symbol of national character, the brave young hero setting out to defend the homeland against the forces that threatened it from outside. The story appeared in school textbooks. It was taught to children as an example of courage and loyalty and the willingness to face difficulty for the sake of others. This reading of the story has been challenged and complicated by later thinkers. Akutagawa Ryunosuke, the great writer of the Taisho period, wrote a version of Momotaro in which the Oni are the sympathetic figures, in which the island they live on is their home, and Momotaro's arrival is an invasion, in which the categories of hero and villain are less clear than the standard story suggests. His Momotaro is not simply brave, he is also careless, setting out not from a genuine desire to protect, but from a restlessness that finds its expression in conquest. These readings do not cancel each other out. They coexist, the way that all good stories contain more than one truth. The Momotaro of the standard version, brave, generous, loyal, setting out to return to the village what has been taken from it, is a real character with real virtues. The Momotaro of Akutagawa, privileged, powerful, acting from motivations that are less pure than they appear, is also real, also worth attending to. Both versions are in the story. The boy from the peach is both the hero of a simple tale and the subject of a complex one, both the figure that generations of children have admired without complication, and the figure that adult readers have returned to with more complicated eyes. This is what the enduring stories do. They hold more than one truth at once. They grow with the reader, yielding the simple reading first, and the more complex one when the reader is ready for it. The night before they reached Onigashima, they camped on the coast. The sea was close, the sound of it constant, the particular sound of waves on a rocky shore that is neither the crash of surf nor the quiet of a sheltered bay, but something between them, a steady, measured sound, the sea making its presence known without insisting on it. They made a fire. The fire on the coast at night has a particular quality. The wind coming off the water pushing it sideways, the light catching the spray from the nearest waves and making brief, small rainbows at the edge of the firelight, and sitting beside it with the dark sea behind you and the dark land ahead of you produces a particular quality of clarity, the clarity of a person who has come as far as the road can take them and must now wait for the water. Momotaro sat with his companions and looked out at the sea. Somewhere out there, beyond the line where the sky and the water became indistinguishable, the island waited. He could not see it. He knew it was there. The dog lay beside him with his head on his paws, watching the fire with the particular patient attention that dogs bring to fires. The monkey sat slightly apart, watching the sea, doing the constant small calculations that monkeys make, assessing, considering, finding in the darkness of the water the information that might be useful tomorrow. The pheasant had folded itself into sleep, head tucked, feathers settled, already resting for the flight that tomorrow would require. Momotaro did not sleep immediately. He sat with the fire and the sea and thought about the old man and the old woman, about the house at the edge of the village, the garden in the late afternoon, the particular quality of the evenings there, the low light and the quiet, and the two people who had made a life together in a small space with great care. He was doing this for them. Not only for them, not only for the specific two people in the specific house, but for the particular kind of life they represented, the particular quality of a life lived with patience and care in a specific place over a long time. That was worth crossing the water for. The peach. In Japan, as in China, from which so much of the early Japanese cultural tradition draws, the peach is not simply a fruit. It is a sacred object, a fruit associated with long life and good fortune, with the particular power to ward off evil and bring blessing. The peach appears in the earliest Japanese mythology, in the Kojiki, the record of ancient matters, compiled in 712 CE, the oldest surviving chronicle in Japan. The god Izanagi, fleeing from the underworld after the death of his wife Izanami, throws peaches at the demons who are pursuing him. The peaches drive them back. This is the original power of the peach in the Japanese imagination, the fruit that the demons cannot withstand, the sacred sweetness that is antithetical to darkness, that has in it something that the forces of the underworld cannot approach. Momotaro was born from a peach, not simply born near a peach, not simply associated with a peach, but born from within the fruit itself, emerging from its center, the way that life sometimes emerges from the most unexpected containers. This origin is not incidental. It says something about what Momotaro is. It says that he carries in him the particular power of the peach, the ability to stand against what the darkness sends, the particular quality of the sacred fruit that has been given human form and human will. The kibi dango, the millet dumplings, also belong to this tradition. Kibi is millet, grown in the Kibi region of what is now Okayama, the region most closely associated with the Momotaro legend, and the dumplings made from it are both the ordinary food of travelers and something more, the specific food of this specific journey, the thing that binds the companions together, that transforms the dog and the monkey and the pheasant from animals encountered on a road into something more than that, into partners, into the team that the task requires. Okayama, the prefecture on the western coast of Honshu that claims Momotaro as its own, has built a relationship with the story that goes beyond the usual relationship between a place and a legend. The Kibi Plain, the broad, flat agricultural area where the Asahi River and the Yoshi River meet the Seto Inland Sea, is the landscape of the Momotaro story. Walking through it today, you encounter the legend at every turn, in the names of the confectionaries that sell kibidango at every train station and tourist shop, in the statues that appear in parks and at roadsides, in the festivals that mark the calendar and keep the story alive in the lived experience of the region. But the connection runs deeper than tourism. The legend of Momotaro is connected, by many scholars, to the actual history of the Kibi region, to a real historical figure called Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, a commander sent by the Yamato court in the 4th or 5th century to bring the powerful Kibi clan under the authority of the central government. His opponent in this campaign was a figure called Ura, described in the later records as a demon, as an oni, who is said to have been a foreigner, perhaps a person from the Korean peninsula or from elsewhere on the continent, who had established himself in the region and was challenging the authority of the court. The battle between Kibitsuhiko and Ura became, over the centuries, the battle between Momotaro and the Oni of Onegashima. The historical conflict, real armies, real politics, real consequences, was transformed in the imagination of the people who told the story into the simpler and more universal form of the folk tale. The hero who sets out, the companions who join him, the island that must be reached, the return that brings peace. History becomes legend. Legend becomes story. Story becomes the thing that grandmothers tell grandchildren by the light of the evening lamp, while outside the rice fields settle into the quiet of the night. Why does this story last? Not all stories last. Most stories are told and forgotten, told for their moment, serving the need of that moment, and then released when the moment passes. But some stories outlast their moment. Some stories are told for 100 years, and then 100 more, and then another 100, told in different forms, with different emphases, for different purposes, and yet remain recognizable, remain themselves, across all the retelling. Momotaro is one of these. It has been told for a very long time, the earliest surviving written versions appearing in the Edo period, and in that time it has been a children's story and a nationalist symbol, and a subject of literary criticism, and a source of advertising slogans, and a theme for festivals, and a motif on manhole covers. It has been serious, and it has been funny. It has been simple, and it has been complex. It has been used by people with many different intentions to say many different things. And through all of this, it has remained the same story. A boy born from a peach, raised by two old people who loved him, setting out with companions who joined him along the way, crossing the sea to the island of the Oni, and coming back. The shape of the story does not change. What changes is what the listener brings to it, the age and the experience and the questions that the person hearing the story is carrying at the moment of the hearing. A child hears courage and adventure, An adult hears the old couple waiting, the trust they extended without knowing how it would end. A scholar hears the zodiac, the Sato Inland Sea, the echo of the historical Kibitsuhiko. All of these are in the story. All of these are the story, and the story endures because it is large enough to hold all of them. The road home is different from the road out. This is one of the things that anyone who has made a significant journey knows without being told, that the path back has a different quality from the path forward, even when it is the same road, even when the same trees stand beside it, and the same stones are underfoot. The path out carries the weight of what lies ahead, the unknown, the task that has not yet been faced, the question of whether what needs to happen will in fact happen. The path back carries the weight of what has already been done, which is a lighter weight, most of the time, even when what was done was difficult, because it is behind you, settled, no longer pending. Momotaro walked the road home. The dog walked beside him. The same easy gait, the same steady presence, but different now. Different in the way that anything is different after it has done something real, after it has been tested and found to be what it seemed to be. The monkey walked beside the dog, the pheasant flew overhead, and the cart came behind, slower than the rest, weighted with what had been recovered, its wheels turning on the path with the particular sound of something moving under load, the creak and roll of wooden wheels on a packed dirt road. The mountains appeared, first as a shape on the horizon, then as a presence, then as the specific peaks that Momotaro had known all his life, the ones visible from the field behind the house, the ones that told the time of year by where the snow sat on them and where it didn't. The river appeared next, not the place where the peach came, not the exact stretch of bank where the old woman had been kneeling in the cold, but the same river, the sound of it arriving before the sight of it, the particular sound of this water in this valley that was home. The village appeared last. The old man and the old woman were in the garden when they heard footsteps on the path. They had been waiting in the particular way they had agreed, without saying they had agreed, to wait, continuing the ordinary work of their days, the garden and the cooking and the mending, while something entirely other than the ordinary was happening somewhere out in the world. He came around the bend in the path, older now, or rather, more himself, in the way that a journey makes a person more themselves, fills in the outlines with the particular weight of experience. Behind him, the dog, walking steadily, the monkey, loose and easy, the pheasant overhead, and behind them all, the cart with its cargo, the things recovered, the evidence of what had been done. The old woman did not run. She simply stopped what she was doing and stood and looked at the person who had come back to her, at her son, born from a peach, returned from the sea, and felt the particular feeling of a person who has let something go without quite letting it go, and now has it back in a form that is different from how it left, but unmistakably itself. The old man came and stood beside her. They were quiet. Then the old man said, "Welcome home," and that was enough. Let it all soften now, the river and the peach coming around the bend, the two old faces looking down at the child, the road and the three companions, the sea and the island, and the battle and the sea again, the cart coming home heavy with what was recovered, the garden in the late afternoon, The old woman standing still. Welcome home. There is something in this story for sleep. Not the battle, not the drama, but the beginning and the end, the waiting and the return. The two old people who continued their days while something larger was happening elsewhere, who trusted that what they had raised with love would find its way back, who were there when it did. Tonight, let what is out in the world be out in the world. It will find its way. Things do. For now there is only this, the house, the warmth, the particular piece of a place that someone has been waiting in, and is still waiting in, and will be waiting in when you are ready to come home to it. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night. New Japanese stories every day on Quiet Tales of Japan. See you again for your next sleep. Kaguya, a Japanese folktale for sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. Let your body settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest where they are, open and easy. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nothing to hold, nothing to figure out. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight we are going somewhere quiet and green and very old. Somewhere in the autumn countryside of Japan, where the bamboo grows in tall, dense groves that move in the wind with a sound like distant water, and the nights are cool and clear and full of the particular stillness that autumn brings, a stillness that is different from summer stillness, deeper and more settled, as if the world is beginning to prepare itself for something. There is a small house at the edge of a bamboo grove. There is an old man and an old woman, and between them, a child who came from the light inside a bamboo stalk, and who carries, without knowing it, something of that light still. And above the house, above the grove, above the autumn hills, the moon. Breathe in slowly, and let it out. Part 1. The Bamboo Grove. This is the story of the shining princess, and of the old man who found her, and of the autumn that was different from all the autumns before it. Let it carry you gently into rest. Bamboo grows differently from other plants, faster, more urgently, with a quality of vertical ambition that other plants do not have, pushing upward through the soil in a matter of days to heights that trees take years to reach. A bamboo grove is a particular kind of place, different from a forest in ways that go beyond the obvious difference in what grows there. The light in a bamboo grove is different, filtered through thousands of narrow leaves into something thin and greenish and moving, the shadows constantly shifting as the stalks sway, so that the light on the ground beneath them is never quite still. The sound is different too. Bamboo moves in the lightest breeze, and the sound it makes, the dry whisper of leaf against leaf, and the deeper creak of stalk against stalk, is one of the most characteristic sounds of the Japanese countryside, a sound that people who have grown up near bamboo groves hear in their memory long after they have left. The old man had a relationship with the grove that had developed over decades into something that was difficult to describe to anyone who had not had a similar relationship with a place. Not simply familiarity, not simply affection, but something more like the relationship between a person and a language they have spoken all their life, where the knowing goes so deep that it has stopped being knowledge and become instead a way of perceiving, a quality of attention that operates without effort and without the mediation of conscious thought. He knew when it was going to rain, before any visible sign appeared in the sky, because the grove told him, not in words, not in any way he could have explained to someone else, but in the particular quality of stillness that preceded rain, the way the leaves hung differently, and the stalks moved in a different pattern, and the smell of the earth changed in a way that meant water was coming. He knew where the oldest parts of the grove were, the stands that had been there for 100 years or more, whose root systems ran deep and complex beneath the surface, and whose stalks had a different quality from the younger growth, a density, a slight resistance to the cutting tool, a color that was deeper and more settled than the bright green of newer stalks. He knew the places where the grove was thinning, where the soil was less rich or the water less available, and he tended these places with extra attention, sometimes bringing compost from the house to enrich the soil, sometimes clearing competing growth, doing the quiet maintenance work of someone who understands that the health of a thing requires ongoing attention, and that attention given consistently over time is more valuable than attention given intensively once in a while. In autumn, the bamboo grove takes on a particular quality. The light coming through it is cooler than in summer, the shadows longer, the movement of the stalks in the autumn wind carrying a different sound from the summer sound, drier and more restless, as if the grove itself is aware of the season turning. The floor of the grove is covered with fallen bamboo leaves, pale gold and brown, accumulated in drifts against the base of the stalks, making the ground soft and quiet underfoot. Small animals move through the grove, birds that shelter in the stalks, insects that live in the fallen leaves, the occasional fox or tanuki passing through on its way somewhere else. The grove borders the village on one side, and the open hills on the other, and it has stood there for as long as anyone can remember, which in a village is a long time, long enough that the grove has become simply part of the landscape, as much a feature of the place as the river or the hills, not something that anyone thinks about particularly, but something whose absence would be immediately noticed and deeply felt. It is in this grove that an old man has worked for most of his life, cutting bamboo and selling it in the village for whatever purpose bamboo serves, building, crafts, household implements, the 1,001 uses that a material both strong and flexible and light finds in a world that has learned to make the most of what it has. Part 2. The Old Man. His name was Takatori no Okina, which means simply the old man who cuts bamboo, a name that describes what he does rather than who he is, in the way that names in old stories often work, identifying a person by their relationship to their work, as if the work and the person are the same thing, which perhaps they are, when the work has been done long enough and with enough attention. He was not young, and had not been young for a long time, and he had the particular quality of old people who have done physical work outdoors all their lives, a weathered solidity, a body that knows its own limits and works within them, a face that shows the years without being diminished by them. He rose before dawn, as he always had, and ate his simple breakfast in the dark, and took his tools and went into the grove before the light was fully established, working in the cool early morning hours before the day's heat arrived, moving through the familiar rows of bamboo with the unhurried confidence of someone who has done this so many times that the work has become a kind of knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind. He knew the grove the way a person knows something they have spent a lifetime with, not just its physical dimensions and its particular stands and the quality of different sections, but its moods, its rhythms, the way it changed from season to season, and from morning to evening, and from calm days to windy ones. He lived with his wife in a small house at the edge of the grove, a house that had been in his family for generations, and that had the quality of old houses that have been lived in carefully, modest but not bare, practical but not without its small, comfortable details, the marks of a life lived in one place over a long time, visible in the worn places and the arranged things and the small accommodations that a house makes to the people who inhabit it over the years. His wife was of similar age and similar temperament, a woman who had spent her life in the ordinary work of keeping a household, the cooking and the cleaning and the tending of the small garden behind the house, the preservation of food for winter, the maintenance of the things that needed maintaining, and who brought to this work the same quality of steady, unhurried attention that her husband brought to the bamboo grove. They had no children, which was a sorrow that had been with them for a long time, long enough that it had settled into something quieter than grief, not acceptance exactly, but a kind of accommodation, a way of living with an absence that had been there so long it had become simply part of the shape of their life, the way a missing step on a staircase becomes simply a part of the staircase after enough years. They were content in the way that people are content when they have work that needs doing and the skill to do it and each other for company through the long evenings. And if the house was sometimes quieter than they would have liked, they did not speak of it much. Part 3. The Discovery. It was on an autumn morning, when the grove was full of the cool light of early autumn, and the leaves on the ground were just beginning to accumulate, that the old man found her. He had gone into the grove as usual, before full light, and was moving through a section of the grove where the bamboo grew particularly tall and straight, the stalks close together and very still in the windless early morning, when he noticed something that he had not seen before. A faint light emanating from one of the stalks ahead of him, not the reflected light of the dawn coming through the grove, but something else, something that came from inside the bamboo itself, a soft and steady glow that had the quality of moonlight, but was not moonlight, since the moon had set hours before. He stood and looked at it for a moment, and then he approached it carefully, the way he approached anything in the grove that was unfamiliar, slowly, with attention, without reaching conclusions before he had enough information to reach them. The stalk that held the light was indistinguishable from the stalks around it in every other way, the same height, the same color, the same smooth surface, but the light inside it was unmistakable, a warm and gentle radiance that was visible in the joints of the bamboo and in the thin walls of the stalk where the morning light came through at the right angle. 4. The Child of Light. He cut the stalk carefully, with the practiced ease of someone who has cut thousands of stalks and knows exactly how much pressure is required and at what angle. And when it opened, he found inside it a child, very small, no larger than his thumb, sitting in the hollow of the bamboo in a pool of the soft light that had drawn him to the stalk in the first place, looking up at him with eyes that were calm and clear and entirely unafraid. He stood for a long time looking at her, and she looked back at him, and the grove was very quiet around them, and the morning light was coming in at a low angle through the stalks, and the moment had the quality of things that happen only once, that cannot be prepared for and cannot be repeated, that simply arrive and must be received as they are. He took her home. He carried her carefully in his cupped hands, the way he would carry something small and precious and fragile, and he brought her to his wife, who received her in the same spirit of quiet wonder with which he had found her, not with questions about what this meant, or where she had come from, or what was to be done, but with the simple, practical tenderness of someone who has wanted a child for a long time, and has been given one, and is not going to waste time on questions that cannot be answered when there is a child who needs to be cared for. Part 5. The Growing. She grew with a speed that was not natural and yet felt entirely natural, as if the pace of her growth was simply appropriate to what she was. Not frightening, not disturbing, but fitting. The way things are fitting when they are exactly as they should be, even if they are not as expected. Within 3 months she had grown to the size of a normal child, and within a year she was indistinguishable, in outward appearance, from any other girl of her age in the village, except for the light, which remained subtle and almost imperceptible in ordinary daylight, but visible in the evenings, and on overcast days, a faint luminescence that the old man and his wife had grown so accustomed to that they no longer noticed it most of the time, the way you stop noticing the particular quality of light in a room you live in. They named her Kaguya-hime, the Shining Princess, a name that acknowledged what she was without making too much of it, the way practical people name things, accurately, without drama. She was from the beginning a child of unusual quality, not in the showy way of children who perform their unusualness for attention, but in the quieter way of children who are simply themselves, completely and without effort, in a way that makes the people around them feel that they are in the presence of something that is not quite ordinary, without being able to say exactly what it is. She was attentive and quiet, with the quality of attention that some children have of seeming to be fully present in whatever moment they are in, not distracted by what has just happened or what might happen next, but here, in this room, on this morning, with these particular people and this particular quality of light. She helped with the household work without being asked, in the natural way of a child who has grown up watching work being done and has absorbed its rhythms and its purposes without having to be taught them explicitly. She sat with the old woman in the evenings and learned to sew, her small fingers moving carefully over the cloth, her concentration complete, the work absorbing her in the way that good work absorbs people who are suited to it. She went with the old man sometimes into the bamboo grove, walking quietly beside him as he worked, asking questions with the focused curiosity of a child who genuinely wants to understand things and listens carefully to the answers about the bamboo, about which cuts were best and why, about the way different sections of the grove grew differently, and what that told you about the soil and the water and the light. The old man answered these questions with the pleasure of someone who has spent a lifetime accumulating knowledge and rarely has the opportunity to share it, and the walks in the grove became something he looked forward to in a way he had not expected, a new thing in a life that had been, for a long time, mostly the same things in the same order. As the seasons turned and Kaguya-hime settled into the rhythms of the household, she developed her own particular relationship with the small world around the house, the garden, the grove, the path down to the village, the view of the hills from the Ongawa on clear days. The garden was her particular domain, tended with a care that went beyond what was strictly necessary and into something closer to devotion. She learned the names of everything that grew there, the seasonal vegetables and the herbs, and the few flowers that the old woman grew, not for any practical purpose, but simply because they were beautiful, and she tended them all with equal attention, giving to the practical the same quality of care she gave to the decorative, as if the distinction between them was not particularly important. She learned to preserve food for winter, sitting with the old woman through the long autumn afternoons making pickles and drying vegetables and storing rice, the work slow and repetitive and strangely satisfying in the way that slow, repetitive work can be satisfying when you understand its purpose, that what you are doing now is providing for a future self who will be glad, in the cold of February, that the work was done carefully in October. She had a way with the small animals that came near the house, the birds that visited the garden, the occasional cat from the village that wandered up the path, a family of sparrows that nested under the eaves, that suggested a patience and a quality of presence that animals respond to, the kind that comes from being genuinely comfortable with stillness and genuinely undemanding of the creatures you encounter. She was curious about everything in a way that was not restless, but focused, the kind of curiosity that wants to understand things properly, that is not satisfied with surface knowledge, but wants to know how things work and why and what they connect to. She asked the old woman about the history of the village, the families that had been there for generations, the events that people still talked about, the ways that things had changed over the decades, and the ways they had stayed the same. And the old woman, who had a good memory and a storyteller's instinct for what was interesting, found that she had more to say than she had realized, that the history she carried in her head was more extensive than she had thought, summoned forth by the quality of Kaguya-hime's attention. She learned to read properly in those years, working through the texts that the old man had inherited from his father, practical texts about cultivation and crafts, and the management of land, with the focused attention she brought to everything, sometimes stopping to ask questions that showed she was not just reading the words, but thinking about what they meant and how they connected to things she already knew. In the evenings, sometimes she would go out to the garden alone, after the old man and his wife had gone in, and stand in the dark for a while looking at the sky, not at the moon specifically, or not always, but at the whole of it, the stars and the dark between the stars and the particular quality of the sky at night that is different from the sky in day, in ways that go beyond the mere presence or absence of light. The household. The house changed with her presence, as houses change when a child comes into them, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small ways that accumulate over time into something that can be felt without being precisely identified. It was warmer in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, more inhabited, more fully itself, the rooms feeling more like rooms and less like spaces that simply contained furniture and the objects of daily life. The old woman moved through her days with a lightness she had not had before, her work taking on a quality of purpose that simple necessity had not quite given it. There was now someone for whom the meals were made, and the house was kept, someone whose presence gave the daily work a direction and a meaning that it had lacked. In the evenings, the three of them sat together in the main room by the small hearth, and the old man carved or mended tools, and the old woman sewed, and Kaguya-hime sat between them and worked at whatever work she had, sewing or weaving or simply reading, her presence in the room as natural and as necessary as the light from the lamp. They talked a little, as families do in the evenings, about the day, about small things, about nothing in particular, and the silences between the talking were comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable between people who know each other well enough not to need to fill them. Part 7. The Seasons. The seasons passed over the house and the grove and the three people in it, with the unhurried regularity that seasons have, each one bringing its own qualities and its own work and its own particular beauty to the small world of the house and the grove. Winter came, and the bamboo in the grove bent under the weight of the snow until the stalks nearly touched the ground, and then released it in sudden cascades of white that made the grove sound, on quiet mornings, like a series of small polite punctuations in the general silence. The house was warm inside, the small hearth doing its work, and the three of them spent the long winter evenings in the close, comfortable way of people who have learned to be good company for each other in confined spaces, the work of their hands keeping them occupied while the cold pressed in from outside and the grove moved in the winter wind. Spring came gradually, as it always did, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first, and then the paths, and then the grove floor, the bamboo righting itself as the weight left it, the new shoots pushing up through the softening ground, with the urgency that bamboo shoots have, adding inches in a day, startling in their speed after the long stillness of winter. Kaguya-hime watched the spring shoots with a particular attention, kneeling on the grove floor in the early mornings to look at them closely, as if the speed of their growth was something she found personally interesting, a fact about the world that connected to something she understood from the inside. The village below the grove knew of her, in the way that villages know of unusual things within their boundaries, through the accumulation of observations, the passed along comments of people who had seen her in the grove or on the path, the gradual building of a reputation that was, in her case, one of quiet unusualness rather than anything dramatic. People noted that she was beautiful, which was true, and that she had a quality about her that was difficult to name, something in the way she carried herself and the way she looked at things that suggested she was perceiving the world slightly differently from how most people perceived it, not better or worse, but from a different angle, with a different quality of attention. The old man and his wife neither encouraged nor discouraged the village's interest in her, simply going on with their lives in the straightforward way that had always characterized them, neither making a performance of having an unusual child, nor trying to conceal what she was. Kaguya-hime herself moved through the village when she went there with the same quality of calm attention she brought to everything else, interested in what she saw, responsive to the people she met, but essentially self-contained in a way that did not invite intrusion and did not need approval, the way people are who are genuinely comfortable in themselves. The village, for its part, treated her with the mixture of wonder and practical acceptance that villages have always treated unusual things, acknowledging what was unusual and then getting on with the day, which is one of the more admirable qualities of people who live close to the land and have little patience for prolonged astonishment. Summer arrived with its heat and its long days and its particular smells, the green smell of the bamboo grove at full growth, the smell of the river nearby, the smell of the rice paddies in the fields below the village, all of it combining into the complex atmosphere of a Japanese summer that is unlike the summer smell of any other place. Kaguya-hime spent summer mornings in the grove with the old man, learning more of what he knew, asking her careful questions, accumulating a knowledge of bamboo that was becoming, by this point, genuinely substantial. She knew the difference between good and poor quality stalks by touch and by sound, knew the right time to cut for different purposes, knew the sections of the grove that produced the straightest stalks and those that produced the most flexible ones. The old man watched her learning with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has worried, without quite admitting it, that the knowledge they have spent a lifetime accumulating will die with them, and who now sees that it will not. Autumn came again, the second autumn since her arrival, the air cooling, the light changing, the leaves on the trees at the edge of the grove turning in their autumn way, and the bamboo taking on that quality of particular restlessness that it had in the autumn wind. It was in this second autumn that the old man first noticed the change in her, and understood, without wanting to, what it might mean. Part 8. The Moon. The change was subtle, and the old man was not sure, at first, whether he was seeing it or imagining it. A quality of distance in her eyes when she looked at the moon, which was full and bright in the autumn sky and visible from the grove through the gaps between the tall stalks. She had always been attentive to the moon in the way that some people are attentive to it, stopping to look at it when it appeared above the tree line, noting its phases with a casual precision that suggested she tracked them without making a project of doing so. But now the attention was different, more concentrated, more personal, as if the moon were not simply something beautiful to look at, but something she had a relationship with, something that required her attention in a way that went beyond appreciation. On the nights of the full moon in the 8th and 9th months, she sat on the Engawa after dinner and looked at the moon for a long time, her face very still, her expression one that the old man could not quite read, not sad, not happy, but something that contained elements of both in a way that felt larger than either. He sat with her sometimes, on these evenings, not speaking, simply being present in the way that parents are sometimes present with children who are going through something that they cannot help with directly, but can accompany. Part the visitors. Word of her eventually reached beyond the village, as word of unusual things does, traveling along the paths of conversation and rumor and report that connect villages to towns and towns to the capital, growing in the telling as such things grow, acquiring embellishments and emphases that the original facts did not have, but that the imagination adds because it cannot help itself. Men came, men of rank and ambition and, in some cases, genuine feeling, and proposed marriage, and were declined, not unkindly but firmly, in the polite and unambiguous way of someone who knows her own mind, and does not need to apologize for it. She set them tasks, impossible tasks, or tasks so difficult as to amount to the same thing, not out of cruelty, but out of the understanding that she was not going to stay, that any promise of a future with her would be a promise she could not keep, and that it was kinder to give the impossible task than to give the false hope. The tasks went unaccomplished, and the men departed, and the house returned to its usual quiet, and the old man and his wife and Kaguya-hime sat in the evenings by the hearth as they always had, and the grove moved in the wind outside, and the ordinary life of the household went on in its ordinary way, which was, as it had always been, enough. She did not speak much about the visitors after they had gone, and neither did the old man and his wife, because the household had collectively understood, without discussing it, that the visitors were not the real story, and that the real story was the three of them, here, in this house, in these seasons. She told them one evening, in the direct and gentle way that she had always had of telling them difficult things, that she was not from this world, that she had come from the moon, sent here for reasons she did not fully understand, and that the time was approaching when she would need to return. She told them this not with drama, not with tears, but with the same quality of calm honesty with which she told them everything, clearly, completely, with a regard for their feelings that expressed itself in not minimizing what she was saying, but also in not drawing it out longer than was necessary. The old man sat and listened, and said nothing for a long time after she had finished. His wife wept, quietly, in the way of someone who has been expecting something, and is not surprised by it, and is not therefore undone by it, but is simply, genuinely, sad. Kaguya-hime sat between them and held their hands, one in each of hers, and the three of them sat in the autumn evening with the moon rising above the bamboo grove, and the sound of the grove moving in the night wind, coming in through the open shoji, and there was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment. So, they did not try to say it, simply remaining together in the difficulty of what was true. Part 9. The Last Days. The time that remained was short, and they spent it the way people spend time that is short and known to be short, with a quality of attention that ordinary time does not have, each day carrying more weight than a day usually carries, each small thing done together, taking on a significance that small things do not usually have. They continued their routines because routines are how people hold on to the shape of their days when the shape of their lives is changing, and because the routines were themselves a form of love. The meals prepared and eaten together, the evenings by the hearth, the walks in the grove, all of it continuing, all of it the same and all of it different, because they were now doing it while knowing it would end. Kaguya-hime walked in the bamboo grove every morning that week, going to the places she had always gone, touching the stalks she had always touched, standing in the sections of the grove where the light came through in the ways she had learned to love. She went with the old man on his morning rounds, not asking questions as she usually did, but simply accompanying him, her presence beside him quiet and complete, and he worked in his usual way, and she watched in her usual way, and neither of them said much, because there was nothing to say that was better than the silence of simply being together in the place they had both loved. The old woman spent those days doing the things she had always done, but with a deliberateness that was new, making the foods that Kaguya-hime liked best, tending to the small details of the house with an attention that was partly love and partly the need to do something with the feeling that had no other outlet. She mended the girls' clothes and washed them and folded them and put them away, and then thought about this and felt the particular sadness of practical acts that have become suddenly unnecessary. In the evenings, she taught Kaguya-hime the last of what she knew about sewing, the more difficult techniques she had been saving, the patterns she had learned from her own mother, holding the girls' hands and guiding them through the stitches with the patient care of someone who wants to give everything they have before it is too late to give it. Kaguya-hime received all of this with the same grace with which she received everything, fully, without deflecting, without false reassurance, but with a quality of presence that made the people giving to her feel that what they were giving was genuinely received, genuinely appreciated, genuinely worth the giving. The moon grew fuller through those days, and the nights grew cooler, and the bamboo moved in the autumn wind outside the house, and the household continued in its ways, and the time passed in the quiet and necessary way that time passes when it is carrying something toward its end. The autumn evenings in that last year had a quality to them that the old man thought about afterward, not a quality of sadness, though sadness was present, but something more complex, a richness that came from knowing that what was there would not always be there, that the particular combination of the three of them in this house, in this season, was something that existed in a limited quantity, and was being spent, evening by evening, toward its end. They played games sometimes, in the evenings. Simple games, with stones, or cards, that the old man had known since childhood, and that Kaguya-hime had learned quickly and played with the focused attention she brought to everything. And the games were themselves not the point, but the companionable sitting together, the small conversations that arose around the games, the laughter that came occasionally from something unexpected, were the point, and all of it was more vivid than it would have been if they had not known it was running out. The old woman made special foods in those weeks, the things she made only for occasions, the dishes that required more time and care than ordinary meals, and that were therefore a form of celebration, an acknowledgement that what was happening deserved to be marked, and they ate them together in the autumn evenings by the light of the lamp, and the food was good, and the company was good, and the feeling of being together in a warm house while the autumn wind moved through the grove outside was good in the way that only things that are not permanent can be good, which is fully and without reserve. Part 10. The Night of the Full Moon. The night came when it was time, as nights like that always do, with a clarity and a stillness that felt deliberate, as if the world had arranged itself to be present for what was happening. The moon was full and very bright, the largest moon of the autumn, the harvest moon that farmers watch for and poets write about, and its light was strong enough to cast shadows in the bamboo grove, and to turn the dew on the grass silver, and to make the whole small world of the house and the grove look as if it had been remade in a purer and more luminous version of itself. They ate dinner together, the three of them, a simple meal made with care, and they talked a little about ordinary things in the way that people sometimes talk about ordinary things, when the extraordinary is pressing in on all sides, because ordinary things are real and present and a comfort, and because talking about them is a way of saying that the life they have lived together has been, in its ordinary way, good. After dinner, they sat on the Engawa in the moonlight, the three of them in a row, and looked at the grove, and the sky, and the moon above it, and the grove moved in the night wind, with its familiar sound, and the moonlight lay across the bamboo floor in long pale lines, and the night was very beautiful and very still. Part 11. The Departure. When the time came, it came gently, a change in the quality of the light, a sense of movement in the high air above the grove that was not the wind, and then a brightness that descended from the direction of the moon, soft and steady, pooling around the house and the grove with the quality of the light that had been inside the bamboo stalk on the morning the old man had found her. Kaguya-hime stood, and the old man and his wife stood with her, and she turned to them and said what she needed to say, which was not much, because the important things between them had been said over the years, in the ways that important things are usually said, not in words, but in the accumulated evidence of care and attention and presence, in the meals and the evenings, and the walks and the teachings, and the quiet, companionable sitting in the grove. She told them that she was grateful, that the years with them had been the best of what she had known here, that she would carry them with her in whatever way carrying was possible where she was going. The old man held her hands for a moment, and his wife held her for a moment longer, and then Kaguya-hime turned and walked toward the light, and the light received her, and she rose into the autumn sky above the bamboo grove, moving toward the moon that was bright and full and waiting above the hills. The old man and his wife watched until she was gone, and then they stood in the moonlight for a while longer, not moving, the grove quiet around them and the night very large and very still. Part 12. After. They went inside eventually, the old man and his wife, when the cold of the night had settled in enough to make standing outside impractical, and they sat by the hearth in the quiet of the house, and did not say much, because there was not much to say that was adequate, and they both knew it. The house was the same house it had always been, and the things in it were the same things, but the quality of the air in the rooms was different in a way that was hard to describe. Not empty, not cold, but changed, the way a room changes when someone who has been in it for a long time leaves it, taking with them not just their presence, but some particular quality of the atmosphere that had been there because of them. The old man went to the grove the next morning, as he always did, before full light, and he walked through it in his usual way and did the work that needed doing, and the grove was the same grove it had always been. The same stalks, the same light, the same sounds, and also different, in the way that familiar places become different when something has changed in how you see them. He found himself stopping sometimes, in the sections of the grove where she had walked beside him, and simply standing for a moment in the particular quality of light there, not thinking anything in particular, simply being present in a place that was present to him in a new way. His wife tended the house with the same care she had always brought to it, and the meals were the same meals, and the evenings were the same evenings in their outward form, and if she sometimes sat in the evenings, in the place where Kaguya-hime had sat, doing her sewing in the same pool of lamplight, it was not out of sadness exactly, but out of a kind of continuation, keeping the shape of the thing even when the thing itself had changed, the way people keep the habits of those they have loved after those people are gone, as a form of memory and as a form of gratitude. The autumn continued around them, and the winter came, and the bamboo bent under the snow again, as it had bent the winter before, and the household went on in its ways, and time passed, and the loss became part of the shape of their life, the way things do when they have been given enough time to settle. They looked at the moon more than they had before, both of them, on the nights when it was visible and bright, not with grief, or not only with grief, but with a quality of attention that had not been there before, the attention of people who know that the moon is not simply the moon. On the night of the full moon, in the 8th month of each year, they sat on the Ongawa together and looked at it for a long time without speaking, which was its own form of commemoration, its own form of keeping. Part 13. The Bamboo and the Gold. There is one other thing the story tells about the old man and the bamboo grove, a thing that belongs to the time after Kaguya-hime came to live with them, and that is worth telling because it says something true about the way that good fortune works in old stories, not as a reward exactly, and not as something earned, but as a kind of overflow, a spilling out of abundance into the ordinary world, from something that is not ordinary. In the months after he found her, the old man noticed that the bamboo he cut had changed in some of its sections, that certain stalks, when he cut them, contained not the usual hollow interior, but something else, a warmth that he could feel through the walls of the stalk, and sometimes a faint gleam that resolved, when he opened the stalk, into a small quantity of gold, lying in the hollow the way water lies in a vessel, simply there, without explanation. He did not understand this, and did not try to, in the same way that he had not tried to understand the child in the bamboo, accepting it as part of the same dispensation, the same quiet generosity of something he could not name, but was grateful for. The gold was enough, over the months, to ease the life of the household considerably, not to make them rich, but to remove the particular anxiety of people who have always had enough, but have never had more than enough, who have always known that the margin between sufficiency and difficulty was narrow. And so the story of the Shining Princess settles into the autumn stillness, like moonlight settling onto the bamboo grove, like the last of the autumn leaves coming to rest on the quiet ground. She was real, in whatever way such things are real. Real as the light inside the bamboo was real. Real as the care of the old man and his wife was real. Real as the grief of losing her and the gratitude of having had her, both of which are real, and both of which are true, and neither of which cancels the other. Stories like this one carry something true in them about the things that come into our lives from outside the ordinary, that arrive unexpectedly, stay for a time that is never long enough, change everything about the shape of our days while they are with us, and leave behind, when they go, something that is different from what was there before they came. They carry something true about care, about the way that caring for something, tending to it with attention and patience over time, creates a connection that is real and lasting even when the thing itself is gone. The way the grove still holds the memory of her presence in its particular quality of light on certain mornings. They carry something true about the moon, about the way it has always been there above the ordinary world, patient and bright, belonging to something larger than any of the stories we tell about it, and yet somehow present in all of them. Let these things rest in you now. You have traveled tonight through the autumn countryside of old Japan, through a bamboo grove and a small house, and the quiet seasons of a life that was changed, gently and completely, by something that came from the light inside a bamboo stalk and returned, in the end, to the light that had sent it. The bamboo grove is still there, as bamboo groves are, growing, always growing, pushing new stalks up through the autumn soil, the old stalks standing tall and the new ones rising beside them, the light coming through the layered leaves in its particular shifting way, the grove making its familiar sound in the autumn wind. The moon is still there above it, as it has always been, patient and bright, moving through its phases with the unhurried regularity of something that has been doing this for longer than the grove has been growing, and longer than anyone who has looked at it has been alive to look. The old man and his wife are still there, in the story, sitting on their engawa in the autumn evening, looking at the moon together in the quiet way of people who know something about it that most people do not, and who carry that knowledge gently, without making too much of it, the way you carry things that are both precious and private. Let it all soften now, the bamboo grove in the autumn wind, the moonlight on the grove floor, the small warm house at the edge of the trees, the light that came from inside the bamboo on an autumn morning and filled the house for the years. It stayed, the autumn sky and the full moon rising above the hills, patient and bright and very far away, and somehow, in the way of things that are very far away and very old, close. Let it dissolve gently, like morning mist in the bamboo grove, like the soft light of an autumn moon fading at dawn. There is nothing left to hold tonight, nothing to figure out, nothing to carry. You are warm and you are still, and you are exactly where you should be. The bamboo is patient. The moon is kind tonight. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet take you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night.